Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Learn Linux TV. And also, welcome back to my brand new full course on Netdata. In this course, what I'm going to do is teach you everything that you need to know to monitor your infrastructure with Netdata. In the previous video, it was more of an introduction. I went over the course itself, how it's structured, and also how you can get the most out of the course. This time around, it's time for action. What we're going to do is get Netdata installed. In fact, I recommend that you follow along with me and get it installed on multiple virtual machines. Either way, the installations that we set up in this video are going to be what we'll use as a reference for the future videos in this course. You know what? I'm ready to get started, so if you're ready to go, let's get right into it. First things first, I want to have us do a quick inventory to make sure we're on the same page. I recommend that you follow along with me as we work through each example, as that will help you learn much faster. To facilitate that, it's highly recommended that you create several virtual machines to experiment with. This way, we could create an isolated testing environment we can use to experiment while we learn, rather than making changes to actual production servers. We'll absolutely graduate Netdata to production later in the course, but for now, we should use test servers, such as virtual machines, as we go. If you don't have any VMs yet, VirtualBox is one to consider for this purpose, or even a cloud provider if you have access to one. On my end, I'm going to create 3 servers within my cloud provider. I'll set each one of them up to match a real-world use case, so that way this will be even more fun. What I'll do is create a database server, a web server, and a file server. This way we can see how Netdata differentiates itself based on the type of server that it's running on. Right here in the window, you can see 3 servers that I've set up. Server number 1 is my database server. Server number 2 is my file server. And finally, server 3 is my web server. To make this even more interesting, each one of these servers is running a different distribution of Linux. My database server is running Debian, the file server is running Ubuntu, and finally, the web server is running Alma Linux OS. Next, let's differentiate these servers a little bit. What we'll do is install a few packages, a different set for each of the 3 servers to help simulate our testing environment. For example, we'll install a database engine on the database server, a web service on our web server, and so on. Please note that we won't be creating super functional application configurations in this video. We're going to keep it simple and just set up the basics. Let's start with the database server. This one is running Debian, so what I'm going to do is install MariaDB. And I'm going to do that with the apt install command. I'm going to use sudo because I'm going to be making changes to the system. I'll run apt install, and then MariaDB-server. I'll press enter. I'll type in my super secret password, and I'll press enter to start the process. It's going to install a number of dependencies. That's totally fine. I'll press enter to select the default of yes. You can see that Y in the prompt down here is capitalized, which means that it's the default option. So I don't really need to answer anything. I could just simply press enter and it'll accept the default of yes. Continuing, what I'm going to do is switch over to my file server. This one is running Ubuntu, and I'm going to install NFS on the server. To do so, I'll run sudo apt install, then nfs-kernel-server. I'll press enter. And just like before, it's going to install some dependencies, not nearly as many. I'll press enter to accept the default of yes. And that's all there is to it for this particular server. So let's configure the web server. I'll keep that simple as well, and what I'll do is run sudo dnf install. Since this is Alma Linux OS, it uses the DNF package manager. And what I'm going to do is install Nginx. I'll press enter, type my password in once again, enter, and we see that Y is lowercase. On this distribution, no is the default option. That's the capital one. We want to answer Y for yes for this one here. So I'll do that and press enter. And that's it. We've installed a service on each one of these servers. Again, we're not going to spend any time configuring the services that we've installed. I just wanted to have an example service for Netdata to monitor. I'll leave it up to you whether you want to configure any of these things or not. It's not really relevant for a course at this point. But at this point, we do have some servers set up and ready to go, so that's awesome. In this section, we're going to talk about the installation process for Netdata. I'll summarize the various installation methods available, the requirements, and so on. Then, by the end of this section, we'll work through the process of installing Netdata on each of our machines. So, let's dive in. And the first thing I want to bring up in this section is system requirements. When we think of installing an application on any server, we need to understand any potential resource overhead that we might encounter and make an informed decision. Think of it this way: if you have a server that's already starved for resources, installing another service on it might not be a good idea. But as sound as that line of thinking happens to be, Netdata is a bit of an edge case when it comes to system requirements. Reason being, it scales its resource utilization along with the current state of your server, adjusting it up or down as needed. Resource usage also differs by how many metrics you're capturing at any given time, but even then, Netdata's impact on your system should be negligible at worst. That said, on the screen right now is a resource utilization table. I'll break it down for you right now so that way you'll understand what you're looking at. When we install the Netdata agent on a server, it's going to classify the server you install it on to be within one of these categories. For example, if your server is within the machine learning workload, then you can scroll down and view potential impact on that server for having Netdata installed, as well as an optimization tip for how to minimize resource usage for that specific category. As another example, if you have a database server, it'll fall under the database workload. Here we can see that data is compressed and written to disk. We also see a tip for minimizing I/O load, which is a tip that would apply to you if your server is within this workload. So basically, refer to the page linked on the screen right now and match your server's workload to one of the ones on this list, and then you'll get a general idea of how having Netdata installed might impact that server. Anyway, that's about it for resource considerations. In my tests, I haven't noticed any resource contention on any of my servers after installing Netdata, but if you do see an anomaly, you can always stop the Netdata service while you troubleshoot, and your resource usage should immediately return to normal. We'll see examples of managing Netdata's systemd service file shortly. Now it's time to finally get Netdata installed. What we're going to do is run the Netdata installer on each of our 3 virtual machines one after another. Doesn't matter which order you do this in, we'll just be sure to complete the steps I'm going to go over on each test instance. Specifically, what we're going to do is run kickstart.sh, which is a Netdata-specific deployment tool that automates the majority of the installation process. This script will handle any differences between distributions, and is one script you can run regardless of your chosen distro. To install Netdata, what we'll do is use SSH to connect to one of our servers, and once we do that, we'll run the command that I'm going to give you. I'll just clear the screen on each of these to get them ready. I'll start with the database server on my end. So what I'll do is type wget -O and /tmp/netdata -kickstart.sh, then https://get.netdata.cloud, kickstart.sh, &&, and then sh/tmp/netdata-kickstart.sh. So that's the completed command. And also, I'll have a blog article linked in the description down below, and that article will contain all of the commands that we're using, so that way you could copy and paste the commands if you want to. Anyway, I'll press enter, and then enter for yes. Enter again. Just be sure to keep an eye on which option is capitalized. You can simply answer Y for yes, or if Y is capital, just press enter. And as you can see, Netdata is installed on the server. So what I'm going to do is run this same command on the other servers. I'm just going to copy this entire command right here. And then what I'll do is switch over to the file server. Again, it doesn't matter the order in which you do this. And as you can see, I pasted that same command right here, so I'll press enter. Enter again for yes. Enter again. And the second server is complete. Now I'm going to complete the same task on this third and final server, so I'll paste the command right here into this window. And there it is. I'll press enter. And this sometimes happens where you might not have wget installed on the server. That's okay. What I'll do is run sudo dnf install and then wget. You can replace dnf with whatever your package manager happens to be for your distro. I'll press enter. I'll type Y for yes. N is capital, so on this distro, I have to explicitly call out Y when I want to confirm something. And now that's done. If I recall the previous command, it should work this time. Let's see. Type Y for yes. I'm just going to keep doing this anytime it comes up. And now we have Netdata installed on each of my 3 servers. But before we continue, let's break down what exactly is happening here. On each of the servers, I ran this command right here. First, we're using the wget command to download kickstart.sh from Netdata. We're going to store it in /tmp/netdata-kickstart.sh, and then the last part of the script runs the downloaded script immediately. And from there, the process is pretty much automatic. You just saw the installation proceed right after I ran this command. I had to type Y for yes a number of times, but for the most part, it happened pretty much automatically other than that. But at this point, Netdata is installed, so let's check it out and see what it looks like. What I'll do on this server right here is type IP addr show. I want to get the IP address for this server. And the IP address is listed right here. So what I'll do is copy that, and then I'll switch over to a web browser. In the address bar, I'm going to paste in the IP address that I just copied. Then I'm going to type colon, then 19999, just like that. I'll press enter. And here we have Netdata. How cool is that? But we're only seeing a preview of what Netdata has to offer. Right here, I'm going to click the link that says skip and use the dashboard anonymously. We will cover the sign-in process later on in the series, but for right now, I'm going to keep it simple, and I'll click this link right here. Now, in this case, we see a very important message. It's letting me know that Netdata is openly accessible from the internet. I think it's really cool that Netdata gives you this warning. In my case, this is a test server, and I'm not really too concerned about it. It's only going to be up and running while I record this footage. But what I recommend that you do on your end is create a firewall rule that only allows port 19999 from your IP address. I'll just bypass this for now. And here we see Netdata in all of its glory. Now we can already see some metrics regarding the server I just accessed. And there's all kinds of things you could do with this dashboard, as we'll continue to see throughout the series. In fact, in the next video, I'll be giving you a tour of the dashboard, so we won't worry too much about how this works just yet. For now, the important things are to be able to install Netdata and then access this web console. So far, we've done both. Before we continue though, there's some important things that I want to point out. First, it's important to understand that at this point, our Netdata installations on the 3 servers are completely independent. For example, if I access Netdata from my database server, I won't see metrics for my web server or any other server. And that's what I mean by being independent. Yes, you could tie them up into one dashboard, and we'll cover that when we get to the Netdata Cloud section, but for now, we'll just consider each of these 3 installations to be independent because that's what they are. Perhaps more importantly, we need to think about security. Right now, if we have Netdata installed on a public-facing server, such as a cloud instance, then port 19999 is open to everyone all over the world. In fact, we saw a warning message that told us exactly that. While this may not be so much of an issue on a local network, it can be a big issue on a cloud server. So how do you fix it? Basically, what we'll need to do is create a firewall rule. We'll need to limit access to port 19999 from only our home office IP. The problem here is that not all of you guys will be using the same cloud provider as me, or maybe you're not using a cloud provider at all. If that's the case, you'll have to look at the documentation for your platform when it comes to adding a firewall rule, because there's just so many options out there. But the general idea is that you should create a firewall rule for that port to make sure you're the only one that can access it. Now, you might be wondering what the big deal is when it comes to Netdata being public-facing. When it comes to security, threat actors like to use whatever information they can get their hands on in order to profile a potential target. This is known as open source intelligence. This isn't anything specific to Netdata, it's just that when we set up servers, we always need to be mindful of what ports are open to where. Most services you install on a Linux server start off by being public-facing. The general consensus is that a network administrator will only allow access from a specific place. But when you spin up a cloud server, you immediately graduate to being responsible for network access on top of everything else. So by keeping an eye on access to open services, well, that's just a great idea overall. But anyway, great job in getting Netdata installed. What I want to do at this point is discuss some additional options when it comes to installing Netdata. We won't actually need to do anything in this section since we already took care of the installation process, but there are some other options that are worth being aware of that might help out with unique situations, such as needing to install Netdata without access to the internet. And you know what? Let's start with that. As a system administrator, you might find yourself in an air-gapped environment where your only available method of installing an application is by doing so completely offline. If you run into this, Netdata features an offline installer. In fact, here's the command right here. Now, if that command looks a little familiar to you, you're right. The same script we used earlier to install Netdata also has an offline version. You'll notice the --prepare--offline--install source option being included, which is going to result in an offline script being generated, which will then be saved locally. Simply run that script from the server you want to install Netdata onto, and away you go. Whenever you run the kickstart script, there's two possible sources for where Netdata's packages come from. By default, when you run that script, Netdata will install a repository on your server that will contain packages compiled directly by Netdata themselves. Considering the fact we didn't specify that we wanted anything different earlier, we're going to have packages installed that come directly from Netdata. Alternatively, native packages are available as well. These refer to Netdata packages that come directly from your distribution's repositories, instead of Netdata's. This might be a personal preference for some of you, although this preference isn't common. If you do prefer to use only native packages, the --native-only option can be used with a kickstart script to force native packages instead of those from Netdata. Now, before we continue on to the next video, I want to spend a few moments looking a bit deeper at how Netdata runs on your system. First, we'll take a look at managing its service. Whenever you install Netdata, a service file will also be installed as well. In fact, what I'll do right now is show you how to check the status of that service. What we'll do is type systemctl, and then status, and then Netdata. I'll press enter, and let's take a look. So right here on this particular server, we see that Netdata is active and running. I'll do the same thing on my Alma Linux server as well. And in this case, we see that it's not actually running. Some distributions automatically start new services by default and others don't. That's why I wanted to show you the same thing on Alma Linux. Here on my database server, which is running Debian, I didn't have to do anything. As soon as I installed Netdata, the service for it started automatically. In fact, the same thing is true in Ubuntu as well. Ubuntu is based on Debian, so that makes sense. But here on Alma Linux, it did not start up. So let's go ahead and start it right now. We'll run sudo systemctl and then start Netdata, just like that, and then I'll press enter. I'll type in my super secret password, and it should be as simple as that. I'll recall the previous command where I checked the status, this one right here, and I'll press enter. And now we see the status is active and running. So now Netdata is running on my Alma Linux server. And again, that's the command right there that I used to start Netdata. On your end, you might have to run that command if the service didn't start automatically. Also, if you're familiar with systemd commands or systemctl commands, other keywords such as stop, restart, and disable operate exactly as you'd expect. As an aside, I have a whole video that covers systemd if you want to learn more, so I won't worry about that in this particular episode. Next, what we're going to do is take a look at the configuration file for Netdata. What I'll do is change into the etc Netdata directory. That one right there. Press enter. Let's see what's inside. Now you'll notice that we have a Netdata config file right there in the output, so let's take a look at it. Type sudo and then nano. You could use whatever text editor you want, doesn't really matter. Just want to open that up and take a look at it. And here we see the default config file for Netdata. But there's not a lot going on here, at least not by default. Whenever you install Netdata, it's going to use all of its default values. However, you can export its settings and then configure the settings, which is what I'm going to show you how to do right now. Hold Ctrl and press X to break out of this. So I'll show you the command right now to dump the config. It'll take care of saving all the default values that we could then edit as we see fit. So what I'll do is run sudo netdata CLI. I'll use the keyword dump config. I'm going to redirect the output into a file in my home directory. I don't want to save anything in my netdata config directory just yet. I'm going to name it netdata.conf just like that, and I'll press enter. Now what we'll do is just go into our home directory, and you can see the file right there. So let's open it up and take a look at it. Now you'll notice that we have quite a few more lines in this file than we did the other one. You see all the default values. They're commented out, that's totally fine. If you want to override anything, what you could do is uncomment something and then change the values accordingly. Now we'll be taking a look at how to configure Netdata more in future videos, so I'm not going to spend any time right now worrying about the configuration, but if you wanted to know how you go ahead and tweak Netdata, this is how you do it. You dump the config file, tweak it accordingly, and then you could copy it into your etc Netdata directory. That way the config will then take effect. If you do make changes to the file, then basically what you would do is run a command like sudo mv for move. We'll want to move that config file. And then you'll replace the one in the etc Netdata directory with the new one. I'm not going to do that in this particular video. It's beyond the scope of this video, but I just wanted to give you an idea of how you go ahead and configure Netdata if that's something that you want to do. If you do make changes to that particular file or overwrite the config file with a new one, you'll then need to run sudo systemctl, restart, and then Netdata. Again, I'm not going to do that because I didn't actually make any changes, but now you know how to change the Netdata configuration if that's something that you needed to do. And that about does it for this particular episode within my Netdata course. I definitely don't want to overwhelm you guys and put too much into one video. We're going to go through quite a few things within this series. We're going to learn a lot. In fact, I recommend you take your time through this series. Definitely don't rush. Learning is fun, so take your time. In fact, why don't you consider installing Netdata on a few more servers? That way you'll be even more familiar with the process before we continue. And as soon as you're ready, I'll meet you over in the next video. In the meantime, though, thank you so much for watching this video.